This is Zhang, a former soldier of the People's Liberation Army of China, who was hired by Russia to fight in Ukraine. He has been there since December 2023, and his accounts are by far the best of the war so far, clearly illustrating the problems on the modern battlefield and how grim the future of warfare will be in the 21st century. And besides his account being one of the most efficient, the other reason he deserves attention is the fact that the Chinese armed forces today are among the best trained, best equipped, and most technologically advanced on the planet, rivaled only by the United States. So, while most of the war accounts coming from the Ukrainian side and even from the Russians are either from amateurs or from passionate individuals who distort the serious aspects of war, such as tactical and strategic analyses, Zhang Wei's accounts come from a soldier who was properly trained for modern warfare, for that environment, and possibly for an urban conflict setting. And because he is Chinese and not directly involved, he is able to be much more analytical and technical. So in today's video, we'll see what he said and we'll analyze it by comparing it with what we already knew and what was imagined about the war. And we'll see that the war in Ukraine is throwing away more than 30 years of military concepts. But before that, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share the video with everyone you know. Your help is very important to keep Geopolitica Mundial going. My name is Daniel Peta and this is the Geopolitica Mundial channel.
I'm almost fully recovered. I haven't had a bowel movement in about 2 weeks. After coming back, I ate a lot of butter and other foods that are healthy for digestion, but I'm still having blood. For more than 10 days, from the moment I came home until now, I've only made it to the bathroom once. I've been hungry for 2 days. My digestion still isn't good. The first team has 12 people and 2 fighting teams. Actually, it can be divided into 4 fighting teams. But it was the first time I went to the fire war as a veteran support force. The new recruits, I'm telling you, the mortality rate was such that from the moment you entered the battlefield until you died, it took on average only 8 to 10 hours. That's how fast it was. We fought for at least a month because many rooms had corpses, and in the videos I released, all the rooms had corpses. The smell was terrible. Almost all the basements had people dying from both sides. Only Pertino, a Russian, and I came back, and a guy from Nepal who was hit by 4 pieces of shrapnel. Pertino was hit by shrapnel in the leg and arm. The Russian was hit in the leg, and I was hit by the bomb and thrown on top of the house. Half of my body was pinned down. I was wearing a bulletproof vest, so I was okay. A piece of shrapnel scratched my left arm. I saw that while I was taking a shower. Street fighting is very brutal. It's not what I imagined. The second combat team went in and suffered a high casualty rate. Many died. In the old camp, there lived 2 indigenous people from Ponderp. They went to provide support. So far, other troops have stayed and haven't returned. They sent me a message saying they're still there. If Luca receives good medical care, he might be able to save his leg. Otherwise, he'll have to undergo a leg amputation. I haven't talked to Pertino since I got here because one day I was on a mission with 2 old guys, me and Xiao Hei. We formed a 4-person combat team. I was searching in a house, and if there's an enemy, I'll attack. When I got to the middle of the street, I found a drone. They were reconnaissance drones with bombs. The bomb was called Bichka. He called it a shooter, meaning a bomb shooter or a suicide shooter. He called it Gami-Gazi, which is the pronunciation in Russian. It has 2 ways of attacking. We were attacked by drones and by bombs. I was hit by a bomb, my backpack was gone. The ammunition used here is weak. There are mortars, but the power is low. There's a Polish mortar that makes a different sound. Mortars from other countries first make an explosive sound. Then comes the second sound. After it hits the ground and explodes, you hear the third sound. But the Polish mortars don't make any sound when they're launched. They don't make any sound as they fly through the air. You have to listen very carefully because since this is a plane, the wind is very strong. If you listen closely, you might hear a hiss, hiss sound. They're very dangerous. They're very dangerous. That night, Bertino was also afraid. He had never been a soldier before. When I was in the armored unit, he was just along for the ride. He didn't sign up to fight in the battle in the forest. I understand why he was afraid of urban combat. So he ran away. The 2 Russians ran away. I don't blame them. There's nothing to blame them for. That's why in this war you can't trust anyone. Not even your comrades. I mean outside of China. In China that doesn't happen. Because our Chinese soldiers are truly brothers in life and death. If a real war breaks out, they will definitely save you and be willing to sacrifice their own lives to save you. But abroad, you can only rely on yourselves. You can't trust others. I'm telling you, brothers, it's a good thing I made it back alive that night. I found a house that hadn't been discovered by the enemy. After that, we regrouped. Bertino wanted to apologize to me. It's all right. I came here while he was sent somewhere else. Maui asked if I needed to say goodbye to them. I said no. What's the point? A Cuban guy was faking an illness. He said he had a heart problem, so he didn't go to the battle in the forest. He also didn't fight in urban combat. He was in the armored unit and not on the front line. He wasn't even on the second line. He was on the third line, not doing much. I don't know what else to say. Oh yes, before we left, Bertino made a meat stew. When we got there, we got resupplied and had a meal. I ate canned food 3 times. After that, we didn't eat anything. I didn't expect to stay on the battlefield for so long. In the past, the longest was 24 hours. We used to rest during the day and fight at night. Here we fight day and night, without stopping. The opponent has a large number of drones. I know you've seen how their drones bomb tanks. We're experiencing signal interference. We can hear them coming from a distance. The drones came overwhelmingly in the sky, more than birds. They flew in mass with 1 or 2 drones leading the group. If there's signal interference, you can only interfere with the first 2 drones. The ones behind drop bombs on you and the surroundings. You can't even lift your head. No one dares to do that. The opponent does a great job at gathering information. When one of our tanks enters the battlefield, they know. Some drones come with C4 explosives or anti-tank rockets and launch at least 2 or 3 rockets at the tank, and it would become a pile. Boom! 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 You don't have time or anywhere to run. He's going to kill you. You run outside and jump dozens of meters away, damn it. This street fight is completely different from what I imagined. I thought it would be like throwing a grenade. Kicking the door open and going in. Bang, 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 bang. Just like you see in the movies, it's like reliving the experiences from the movies, right? But no, it's not the same here. The opponent is relentless, and so are we. I'll be brutally honest. No one shows mercy. Regular bullets are replaced by armor-piercing rounds. They want the bullets to be deadly, deadly, deadly. Do you understand? After the veterans are done, They bring in some veterans from other units to support us. We can't communicate because of language barriers, and we can't cooperate. Dying in combat is instant. You might be smoking for a few minutes before getting an order to attack another base. Someone can die instantly. They have a lot of drones. If you see their reconnaissance drones, they bring bombs. If you see suicide drones, they're here to bomb you. I was very lucky and never encountered suicide drones. I saw one inside a building when the walls were bombed. The walls here are very thick. I showed you the walls when I filmed at the hospital. I'm telling you, a 2-story building was bombed so that it only had 1 floor. We were afraid to leave our post. The only floor was bombed and only half a floor was left. We hid under the concrete slabs. The drones flew over our heads and bombed us like crazy. They were the big drones with mortars. During the day, it was the smaller suicide drones that attacked the windows. You have nowhere to hide. The houses here are very far apart from each other. After we evacuated in the end and regrouped with veterans from other troops, we attacked 2 fortresses with windbreaks near them. And I'm telling you, we lost dozens of people and we didn't take them. I've been here for about 2 weeks, and based on everything I've seen and known, we've launched offensives 3 times, but haven't been successful. We advanced only 100 meters. The opponent built barbed wire and dug trenches. There are also anti-tank mines and other mines. At that moment, you don't think about the mines. The machine guns, heavy machine guns, rifle grenades, the opponent's drones, they all come after you. The opponent's drones, they all come after you. There were also mortars and rockets bombarding you. And you have nowhere to hide. The thickest trees along the road were thinner than my wrist. So, it's very hard to capture those bases. I suspect the place is a trap set on the other side. I think about that a lot. Besides that, after occupying this building, the opponent uses their walkie-talkies. Our Russian comrades listen to their conversations on walkie-talkies. But they switch channels immediately. We did too. All the channels switch channels every hour. If you forget your channels, you're done for because you've lost contact with your command. Another situation is when the Russian comrades die, I can't communicate, even though I know how to use the walkie-talkie. You have no way to communicate. All cell phone signals are blocked. After occupying the building, the first priority is defense. Otherwise, the opponent's mortars will already have you marked as a target. As soon as you relax, the drones come, followed by mortars and rifle grenades. Then the mortar shells, damn it, keep piling up all around you. When you try to hold the position and need support, the opponent launches cluster munitions at you. They explode in the air with a burst of smoke. In 2 seconds, they go off everywhere over a large area. They're not deadly to armor, but they're lethal to humans. If you step on one, that's it, because your enemies don't give you time to think. There are corpses on the road. Some are covered with white cloth, while others are covered with clothes. They are our soldiers. People ask why we all wear a white armband. Because the Russian national flag has white, blue, and red. So we wear white armbands. The color is auspicious and it's like going to funerals in China. I felt a bit of disgust. I asked why don't we use red? The answer was that some other troops use red, so we wear white. By order of our superior. And what was the order? Kill everyone who isn't wearing a white armband within our sight. Finish them all.
So there are some strategic level aspects we can take from this video. After all, If these accounts are heavy and tense, remember that they are accounts from the side that's winning the war. But what really matters to us are these key considerations, these strategic considerations that he presents. The first is the drone factor, which he mentions a few times in the video. Drones have forced the armed forces to change the entire military doctrine that existed until then. Because throughout the Cold War, the main doctrine of practically all the armed forces in the world, if not all, then at least the vast majority, focused on so-called symmetrical conflicts. That is, state against state, government forces against other government forces. The details of how to wage a war varied, like the NATO standard of combined forces, or the Soviet standard of large-scale joint operations, or even the Chinese standard of People's War. If you want me to talk about that someday, leave it in the comments. But anyway, they were operational variations of the same thing. A confrontation between states was basically focused on massive, heavy, large-scale movements, aiming for territorial occupation to then reach the enemy leadership, besiege or occupy it, and force surrender, and consequently the end of the war. That's where projects like the Soviet tanks T-72 and T-80 came from, which was supposed to form huge columns of tanks along the horizon. Or the response to that, like the United States' heavy A-10 aircraft, specialized in destroying tanks. In short, the war would be a more technological repetition of World War II if it happened. However, this model was already seriously challenged at the height of the Cold War, when dealing with wars known as asymmetric conflicts, that is, those conflicts where a state force faces a marginal, non-state force, so to speak, like guerrillas, organized crime, or terrorist groups. Because in the Vietnam War, the United States, and years later the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, had difficulties making that state-focused model work against guerrilla groups. But even so, this pattern remained the main approach for a long time. But after September 11 and that euphoria of globalization in the early 2000s, which brought a series of ideas like the weakening of states, the end of borders and so on, which kind of prophesied that there would never again be wars between states and that the focus should be entirely on dealing with these asymmetric forces, especially because of the war on terror after September 11, the military logic became that the armed forces should be fast, precise, strategic, and very well equipped with the highest possible technology. The focus was no longer brute force or occupying territory, but rather to neutralize, let's say in an acupuncture-like way, the leadership of enemy cells. And, well, if you're going to add more technology, you have more cost. And if you're not aiming to occupy territory, then you can afford to reallocate that excess equipment to fewer soldiers. So the soldier unit became more expensive, but better equipped and more advanced, and most importantly, it needed to be fast, because now there were no longer fixed physical leaderships in a country's capital, but rather cell leaders who moved from one place to another very quickly. So these units had to be fast, and if you need to be faster, then you need to be lighter. The heavy ones, 70-ton M1 Abrams tanks, came to be seen as relics of the Cold War, because the focus now would be on fast vehicles, fast cars, or fast helicopters that would put soldiers where they needed to be and extract them quickly. This led the whole world to reduce the size of their armed forces, and in some cases also reduce the military budget, especially in the case of European countries. But in the case of the major powers, and I mean the real powers, the United States, China, and Russia, the focus would be to either maintain the same budget or increase it. At the same time, you would reduce the number of soldiers. Now, being a soldier was no longer just about being anyone who only knows the basics. He would need better training, better intellectual qualifications to know more specific things like more languages, more sciences, more cybernetics, and so on. And since he is more elite, what you used to spend on 5 soldiers, you would now spend the equivalent on just 1, especially now with these soldiers being more elite. and consequently more expensive, you need to preserve this investment, which is this more elite soldier, so you make sure he has a better chance of surviving in the field, on the battlefield, than before. Not that they didn't care before, but now this would be the main focus. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, the fastest growing sector in weaponry was the one focused on defensive improvements, that is, things that protected the lives of vehicle crews or increased the survival chances of infantry. And this made war more expensive, much more expensive, because it was no longer enough to just take any 18-year-old guy, put a uniform on him, give him a rifle, a helmet, a pat on the back, and send him to the front lines. No. Now you would need to equip him with night vision goggles, much more training, give him radios, specialized field rations, global positioning system, and anything else that involves technology and more technical knowledge. And, okay, it's more expensive, but instead of spending hundreds of billions on 2 or 3 million soldiers, you keep that cost, but spend it on 700,000 or 800,000 soldiers, for example. And this actually gave a relatively good result, because basically it allowed some countries to freeze their military budgets or even reduce them while still achieving their military objectives. But then came 2022, which was the war in Ukraine. No one actually expected it to happen. There were suspicions, but in reality, no one really did. And now, this light equipment for light troops would no longer be facing semi-illiterate shepherds who only wore a tunic and carried a 50-year-old rifle. No. Now they would be facing artillery fire, trained and equipped soldiers, air fire from attack helicopters and planes, armored vehicles, tanks, and so on. Both the Russians and the Ukrainians broke down. Now the focus was once again on territorial control. And well, Ukraine is a huge country, very large, and with only 200,000 soldiers, you can't do anything. So again, both sides hit a wall, and they saw their most elite troops get decimated right in the first year of the war. But this is where adaptation began. The Russians then focused on the basics, the standard Cold War Soviet Union approach, which is producing large quantities of vehicles quickly and cheaply, because if you add too much technology, it gets more expensive and takes longer to produce. So the idea would be saturation, producing quickly and in large quantities. And also a large amount of infantry to occupy the territory, even if that means less well-trained soldiers who only have basic equipment. NATO didn't do that. They maintained the standard they had established. And they sent this to the Ukrainians, who ended up really overwhelmed by the Russian numerical superiority. Of course, this wasn't due to a lack of awareness. It was a mistake, obviously, but not because they didn't know, but because they miscalculated. The West basically believed that the technological difference of their equipment would be more than enough for the Ukrainians to overcome their numerical inferiority compared to the Russians. And well, that didn't work out. It wasn't a situation like one German tank against 10 Russian tanks as people imagined. It basically ended up being 1-to-1. And then the big problem came in drones. Because here, drones, which until then were basically seen as weapons used by guerrillas with improvised armaments, except of course for those large expensive drones from the United States Air Force, started literally hunting down the extremely expensive vehicles on both sides and turning things into a real hell in the psychology of the infantries. And to deal with drones, neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians had experience or training. In fact, no one in the world does. That's why everything known about drone warfare is being learned the hard way, in practice, over there in Ukraine. And you can notice in his words how the biggest impact of drones is mainly the psychological aspect. Drones don't rest, they're hard to see, and if you use an anti-drone weapon on one, then another drone shows up right behind it. They come in through the windows, they dodge, they detect the big vehicles that are bringing ammunition or support, and so on. They're a real disaster to face. But we have the second point, which is also important, which is the urban factor. And here, if you follow the channel, you know I've already mentioned that urban warfare is the worst there is. Every window, door, crack, alley, hole in the wall, and so on can have a potential shooter, as he himself mentions. Forget those movie scenes with a soldier kicking down the door, another throwing a flashbang or a regular grenade, and then they go in and take out whoever's inside. That worked in Iraq because the number of American soldiers was very high to deal with small insurgent cells, even with poorly equipped and poorly trained fighters, and the difference in equipment was huge. In favor of the Americans, of course. So, you would isolate a block, go in with assault teams, always trying to have at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage, at least when possible, using intel that had already been thoroughly analyzed for days by intelligence officers. You'd enter the apartment and have to deal at most with 4 or 5 fighters who were vastly less equipped than you. The way I say it, it might sound easy, but it's not. Even with all that advantage, it was already a nightmare, because it could be a trap, there could be wrong intelligence. Close quarters combat usually partially cancels out the advantage of individual soldier protection, and so on. But if it was bad in that environment, in Ukraine it's even worse, because you can't isolate entire blocks, you don't have intelligence giving you information about where the enemy is, how many there are, or how they're equipped. The level of equipment on both sides is practically equal. One side can call for reinforcements, and if you were the hunter before, you can quickly become the hunted. And if you manage to do everything right and occupy the building, the other side now knows you're there and will call for artillery fire right on that position. For the Russians, this isn't much of a surprise. They had already suffered terribly from this in the Chechen War back in the 90s. So, because of that, they were somewhat better prepared. But in the end, there's no real way to be fully prepared for urban warfare. It's a nightmare in itself. So they did everything in this war to avoid entering the cities, only going in when they were very important, when there was no other option, or when those cities had a high strategic value that would make a difference in the war. Otherwise, the order is to lay siege to and isolate the city, then bomb it, but to avoid entering it as much as possible whenever they can. So, look, we're talking about how drones have changed all military operations. So in the coming years, expect more and more killer drones. And the cities, as was already said before, even before the war started, the cities are becoming real graveyards for combat forces. In fact, the bigger the city, the worse it is. Especially if we're talking about mega cities, which, it's worth remembering, up until now in human history, we've never had in a war. A major battle in a megacity, which are those cities with more than 5 million people, has never happened, so there's not much that can be done about that yet. In fact, megacities are becoming a burden even for the security forces of their own countries. And based on this context, we can draw some indications of how the next conflicts will probably be. If Israel enters Lebanon, it will be devastating for the Israelis. Hezbollah will probably win. In the Caucasus, Azerbaijan will eviscerate the Armenians with drones if the Armenians don't receive a large amount of specialized drone equipment. And in China, with Taiwan, drones and artificial intelligence will be fundamental, especially because here I have to highlight a very important difference. In Taiwan, if a conflict happens, it will be very different from Ukraine. It will be a naval war, so it will be more technological. The quality of the fighters involved will necessarily have to be better. I hope the army guys don't get mad at me, but it's in the Navy that we have the intellectual elite of a country's armed forces. And a war in Taiwan will involve precisely the most qualified segment of the Chinese armed forces. And if the United States gets involved, it will be the most qualified segment of American fighters, so it will be a more elite conflict. Ukraine is, let's say, a more popular, dirtier war. Despite the drones, it's still archaic. But if we have a war in Taiwan, it will be more elite, sanitized, more elitist, more technological. Anyway, we have to hope that it ends soon and that no more wars start, though I'm skeptical about both because 21st century wars will be even deadlier than those of the 20th century. Thank you all, I hope you enjoyed it.